Proper maintenance of your Cumberland stove is the best way to ensure you'll have many years of trouble-free use. So we want to take some time and go over some of these procedures. To start, we'll go through the daily maintenance of your Cumberland stove, and then we will show you weekly, monthly, annual, and biannual maintenance steps. And by the end, we'll have covered everything that needs to be done as far as the cleaning and maintenance of your Cumberland stove. The first thing we recommend you do before performing any cleaning or maintenance operations on your Cumberland stove is to turn the stove off and unhook the power supply either from the wall or from the back of the stove. The stove should be allowed to cool down for about an hour before performing any cleaning operations. Keep in mind, the stove operates at very high temperatures and you will run the risk of being burned if you do not take the time to allow it to cool down. Let's take a quick look at the tools that are required to do the cleaning and maintenance operations of your Cumberland stove. First, we always recommend that you use a fire-safe ash vac for removing any ash from inside of the stove. The other tools that are required will be a simple drywall screw to clean the holes in the pot and the fire plate, a socket wrench with an extension, an 11/32 socket to remove the combustion motor, a 3/8 socket to remove the inner baffle, a pair of pliers, a putty knife for scraping and cleaning, and a brush to brush the ash away. Let's start with the daily maintenance of your Cumberland stove. These cleaning steps should be performed anytime you fill the hopper with fuel. First, turn your stove off and unhook the power supply. Then allow the stove to cool for about an hour before performing any cleaning and maintenance. The cleaning rod in the front of your stove has a locking mechanism for the pot. Lift the rod and pull it out. Slam it a couple of times, then push it back in. Next, open the door, unscrew the rod from the front of the fire pot, and using a pair of pliers or an oven mitt, grab the fire pot and move it out and up and remove it from the stove. Visually, make sure that the holes in the fire pot are clean and not plugged with ash. Next, take your pliers or oven mitt and remove the fire plate by lifting it up and out. In most cases, on a daily basis, all you will have to do is tap the fire plate a couple of times and it will remove any buildup of ash or buildup in the air holes. To clean any plugged holes, you can use anything that will poke through the holes and clear the debris. In most cases, a drywall screw, nail, and coat hanger work very well. You will notice that the plate has a notch on one side of it. Always be sure that this notch goes out towards the door when placing it back into your stove. If you install the fire plate in the stove backwards, it won't allow the air to come through and properly cool the front of the fire pot. This will result in damage of the fire plate and premature failure of the fire pot. Before reinstalling the fire plate, be sure to brush away any ash that's built up in the pot holder where the fire plate sits. Place the fire pot back into position, screw the rod back into the fire pot, close the door, and you're ready to start your stove. All of the steps need to be done daily to maintain optimal heat from your Cumberland stove. That concludes the daily maintenance segment. For weekly maintenance, we recommend that you do all of the daily cleaning and the additional following steps. Please remember to turn off your stove, unhook the power supply, and allow it to cool for about an hour before performing the weekly cleaning and maintenance tasks. First, slide the rod on the heat exchanger by pulling it back and forth several times. This will clean any buildup of ash on the upper heat exchanger. Inside the stove, there's an upper baffle. Remove this baffle and discard any ash buildup. Sometimes during transportation, the upper baffle falls out of place. It has a lip on each end that simply hooks over the side baffles, so you can slide it in and drop it over and it just sits in place. This baffle serves as additional protection so that the fire isn't placed directly on the heat exchanger tubes. Along with dumping the fire pot and making sure that the plate is clean, you will want to take a little extra time to brush away any ash that is built up next to the fire pot on the ledge. This can be done using a simple paintbrush or wire brush. Because biomass stoves burn wood and make ash, we are dumping the ash into the ash pan. Depending on how hard you are using your stove, the ash will need to be removed from the stove and dumped. It may need to be done every 2 to 3 days. Simply lift up and pull out to remove. Place any ash debris into a metal fire-safe receptacle. That concludes the weekly maintenance segment. Along with the daily and weekly maintenance of your Cumberland stove, we also recommend that monthly you remove the inner baffles and clean the heat exchanger tubes. There is a single screw in each baffle. It takes a 3/8 socket and ratchet or an impact gun, which I prefer, to remove the screws from both baffles. To remove the baffle from the stove, simply pivot the back side out past the potholder screws, lift it up, and slide it out. This exposes the heat exchanger tubes. To maintain optimal heat, brush off the patented heat exchanger tubes. After you've cleaned the ledge, you'll also want to vacuum below where the ash pan sits in the stove, and also vacuum the inner back panel. You'll notice a rectangular tube behind the ash pan. This is the exhaust manifold, and that should also be vacuumed out monthly. Most ash vacs have a small diameter tube that easily allows you to vacuum out the exhaust manifold. As the final step, we recommend that once a month you run the stove out of fuel and vacuum out any fines or residue that have built up in the auger. Fine buildups at the base of the auger can affect the feed rate of your stove. That concludes the monthly maintenance segment. The final step in the process is the annual or biannual maintenance of the Cumberland stove. Perform these tasks every 2 to 3 tons of fuel. If you're burning your stove really heavy, it may need to be done mid-season as well. For your annual maintenance, we recommend that you do all of the daily, weekly, and monthly cleaning in addition to the following steps. Please remember to turn off your stove, unhook the power supply, and allow the stove to cool for about an hour before performing any of the annual cleaning and maintenance tasks. First, you need to remove the venting and clean the exhaust port coming out of the back of your stove. You will also need to remove the combustion motor and clean the combustion motor fan housing. To do this, you will need to remove the side panel, reach in through the air cleaner opening, and pushing on the panel from the inside and the outside, slide the panel up, push it out, and move it down out of the way. Next, remove the motor and clean it and the motor housing. To remove the motor, you'll notice that there are 6 nuts mounted on studs around in a circle. You do not have to remove the entire housing from the stove. You can simply remove the nuts, pull the motor from the housing, and clean the impellers and the back side of the impellers. Then go inside the fan housing with a putty knife or small screwdriver and scrape off any residue that's built up in the fan housing. Be sure to vacuum it out. If you don't perform these tasks every 2 to 3 tons of fuel, you will likely start having vacuum faults with your stove, which is the motor's inability to remove the exhaust correctly. Once you have properly cleaned everything, you are ready to reinstall your parts and restart your stove. This concludes the complete maintenance program for the Cumberland stove.